Welcome to The Explainer, everyone. Today, we're unpacking one of the absolute most chilling, just completely perplexing mysteries of the entire 20th century, the Dyatlov Pass Incident. We're going to break down the raw facts, look at the truly bizarre evidence, and step through the modern scientific conclusions, one piece at a time. Let's get right into it. To really wrap our heads around this event, we have to transport ourselves back to the night of February 1st, 1959. Picture this. You're out in the freezing, completely unforgiving wilderness of the northern Ural Mountains in the Soviet Union, what we now know as modern-day Russia. Just imagine the utter darkness, right? Howling winds and this isolated, endless expanse of snow, literally miles and miles from any kind of civilization. Somewhere out there in that dark, something catastrophic happened. Something so bizarre that it's kept the world guessing for decades.
Section 1. The Ill-Fated Expedition. Okay, let's dive into this.
Before we look at what went wrong, we really need to know who was actually brave or maybe crazy enough to take on these mountains. Now, 10 hikers originally set out on this grueling journey, but fate stepped in pretty early on. One of the hikers, a guy named Yuri, got sick and had to turn back. So the remaining 9 pushed forward into the wild, led by a highly experienced hiker named Igor Dyatlov. And in fact, the pass is actually named after him today. And man, Yuri's sudden illness, that was an unbelievable stroke of luck, because it ended up making him the sole survivor of the original group.
As those 9 remaining hikers pushed forward under Dyatlov's lead, the conditions they were dealing with were just unimaginably harsh. The temperature absolutely plummeted. We're talking anywhere between -25 and -30 degrees Celsius. Just let that number sink in for a second. -30. You combine that with incredibly strong biting winds, and these are literally life or death stakes. Out there in weather like that, your shelter is your absolute one and only lifeline.
Section 2. A gruesome discovery. So when the hikers didn't return on schedule, search parties were sent out into that massive freezing expanse. And when they finally found the campsite, they didn't find all the bodies at once. It actually took several agonizing months, finding them scattered out in the snow. But honestly, it was the tent itself that was the first major puzzle. It hadn't blown away, it hadn't been unzipped. The tent was cut open from the inside. Now, what's really interesting here is the logic, or lack thereof. We just talked about how at -30 degrees Celsius, your tent is your only protection against certain death. What on earth could possibly possess a group of seasoned, totally rational hikers to frantically slash open their own shelter from the inside and run out into the freezing night?
Section 3. The puzzling evidence. Once the bodies were actually recovered, investigators had to figure out how these experienced hikers met their end. Now, some of the group, which you'd totally expect after fleeing a slash tent, died of hypothermia in that extreme cold. But the medical examiners found other things that completely baffled the entire world. Some of these hikers had severe internal injuries. I'm talking about crushed ribs and serious skull fractures. That is the kind of blunt force trauma you'd expect from a high-speed car crash, not a snowstorm. And it gets even more disturbing. One hiker, Lyudmila Dubanina, was found with a missing tongue. Unbelievable, right? And if that wasn't strange enough, they even detected low levels of radiation on some of the hikers' clothing. Now, I definitely need to point out here, despite literally decades of wild speculation, there is absolutely no conclusive evidence linking that low-level radiation to the actual cause of their deaths. So, you're the Soviet authorities in 1959. You're looking at slash tents, crushed ribs, missing body parts, and you are totally struggling to explain any of it. Well, they officially closed the case with this statement: death caused by an unknown compelling natural force. Wow. It's a haunting phrase, isn't it? Unknown compelling natural force. It leaves this massive void of actual information. And as we know, when there's a void like that, conspiracy theories, everything from secret military experiments to straight-up supernatural events, spread like wildfire to fill it.
So we have to ask ourselves, what actually happened in the dark out there? Are we really just supposed to accept an unknown compelling force and leave it at that? Well, thankfully, no. We don't have to rely on some vague conclusion from 1959 anymore. Let's wipe the slate clean, step away from the spooky ghost stories, and look at how modern science has tackled this exact puzzle.
Section 4. Solving the enduring mystery. And this brilliantly illustrates how rigorous science can ground decades of sensationalism. In 2021, there was this massive, comprehensive Russian review to finally put all those wild theories to the test using modern analytical tools. We go from that incredibly spooky 1959 conclusion of an unknown, compelling natural force directly to a concrete scientific determination in 2021. And the verdict?
A very specific type of snowslide called a slab avalanche triggered the hikers to flee. That was then followed by fatal hypothermia and severe trauma as they desperately tried to survive in the pitch black. A real aha moment, right? Let's walk through the actual sequence of events researchers pieced together. First, a heavy, solid block of snow, that's your slab avalanche, strikes the tent in the dead of night. Think about that incredible, sudden weight crashing down. That perfectly explains the crushed ribs and skull fractures. They were injured while they were still inside or right as they were trying to escape. Second, they're suddenly buried, they're panicking, and that forces them to frantically cut their way out of the tent from the inside. In that terrifying moment, you are prioritizing immediate escape from suffocating snow over putting on your winter coat, right? And finally, step 3. They're outside in minus 30-degree winds, they are injured, underdressed, and they tragically succumb to hypothermia and further trauma as they stumble blindly through that dark terrain.
Okay, so the avalanche completely explains why they fled and how they got those broken bones. But what about that missing tongue? That's the detail everyone fixates on. Well, forensic experts point to a totally natural process called stream decomposition. Ludmila Dubina's body was actually found in a small stream environment. So her specific injuries are entirely consistent with natural post-mortem decay in a wet environment. It wasn't anything supernatural or malicious. It was simply the really harsh biological reality of where her body rested for all those months before she was finally discovered.
The big takeaway here is that science gives us incredibly strong, grounded answers. The slab avalanche explanation is widely considered the absolute leading scientific theory today. It neatly accounts for the cut tent, the severe blunt force trauma, and the chaotic way the hikers were scattered. But, the scientific debate does still continue. Because so much time has passed, because there's 0 living witnesses, and because of that weird little anomaly of the radiation on the clothing, some very specific details are still debated amongst researchers. And that just keeps the flame of this mystery alive.
Which brings us to our final thought. The hard facts tell us a deeply tragic story of 9 brave hikers who were just overwhelmed by a sudden, brutal act of nature. And yet, our enduring fascination with Dyatlov Pass really reminds us of how powerfully we are drawn to the unknown. So I'll leave you with this. Even with all the incredible advancements of modern science we have today, what other secrets might the vast, frozen Ural Mountains still be hiding? Thanks so much for exploring this fascinating case with me today. Take these facts, weigh the evidence, and as always, keep questioning the world around you.